What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and League of Legends patch 12.7 is coming, so let's talk about it. Alright, what are the quick notes at the very beginning? Well, MSI is right around the corner. It'll be played on 12.8, so they're doing these spicier changes on this patch, so that if something ends up being well over or under tuned, they can try again later. Now, of course, we won't really see any pro play on 12.7, but they'll look at solo queue win rates and then pivot pretty quickly. They'll have enough time to get, the first maybe week of data and then make instant reactions. And that's going to be pretty reasonable. They could make some good choices there. Alrighty, so overall, nerfs because of pro play. Jayce, Lee Sin, Ryze, and Zeri. And then a slew of buffs to see more interesting things going on. Also, Rengar been doing interesting things to solo queue, so some updates there, and there's some interesting item changes as well, some that I lit quite a bit. Interesting item for Nutsum Renewer, whatever, really minor issue here. Let's talk about what's going on. First up is Gangplank, who's actually getting buffed. We don't see a ton of him, but certainly is a pretty strong champion, or at least can be. And minus 20 mana cost on the W, as well as increased burn damage in later levels. I think this scales linearly, so it's increased damage from level 2 onwards, but here is a look at Gangplank overall. Is how much damage an auto attack plus his passive deals. As you can see, yes, it indeed increases pretty quickly from level 2 onwards, but and the mana costs go down this way. So yeah, I mean, basically, he's gonna have more mana to spend. If he's in rough lanes, he can farm a lot more by spamming oranges if he needs to. Nothing much to say about this one. Does more damage, has more health. Cool beans. Next up is Gwen. Now, Gwen did get hit really hard in the jungle, as it turns out. Let me try to get this all on the screen. There we go. Gwen got hit a lot harder in the jungle than I expected she would. So I was wrong about that one. Take that one as an L on my side. But anyway, has mostly disappeared from play. And they're going to keep trying to find ways to buff her so that, she is playable in pro and, a reasonable meta pick. But also, buffs that affect solo queue so that she can have that gap between 100% pick ban in pro and unplayable in solo queue closed. So more refund on landing your E. The reason this exists, by the way, is because they generally don't want Gwen to just be like hypermobile at all times. You can't just keep dodging skill shots, hiding away, getting over walls, yada. Actually requires you to land auto attacks. In fact, every single thing she does on her kit, aside from her W, requires you to auto attack to make it better. The E resets an auto attack, obviously doubles its attack speed. The Q deals more damage if you auto attack. The R can't be recast till you auto attack. And so they want to make sure that she can't just do stuff while playing far away. She has to be in your face at all times. If she can't auto attack, she doesn't do her job at all. And okay, fair enough. They're just kind of going into that a bit harder with the E refund. Needlework cooldown, honestly pretty meaningful. Generally speaking, I would say that early game tends to affect pro more than solo queue. Also, I have a suspicion that changes to ultimates look better on paper than they actually affect in the real world. So ulti buffs, I think, will tend to affect pro play and player perception more than actual champion power. That's my theory. It's kind of untested though, so don't take too much stock into it. But here is Gwen's E cooldown after landing an auto attack. It is down by 20% because, of course, a 50% refund because it's 60% refund. And there's the numbers, right? And then R cooldown, again, down earlier in the game, and then not any better in the late game. Nothing too special here. Pretty straightforward stuff. Next up is Jayce, who's getting a somewhat bigger set of changes. They are missing that the base health also went down with the health growth, but considering they have this thing here, that's going to be the numbers. Base armor also went down with the armor growth going up. So basically, Jayce is still going to have a lot of damage as a lane bully, but he's going to be a lot squishier in the early game. 520 base health, 22 armor is definitely on the incredibly low side, and so trying to find ways to assassinate him or counter gank him or whatever, such when he flash W's in or something, flash Q in the W, that kind of stuff, that can look pretty good. So what does that look like for our boy Jayce? And indeed, he is down a lot in the early game. Just in terms of raw base health, down about 7%. Sure, he might go Doran's Blade or he might go Doran's Shield in really bad matchups, which can elevate his health a little bit, but that's not going to change all that much. It's still going to be really rough. The other change, and I guess even if you roll like Corrupting Potion, right, that's going to be some flat health as regen, kind of in the long run. Not going to affect the burst windows quite as much, but okay, it's still there. But the bigger change is the fact that his armor is down as well. So multiplying his armor into his health, he is down even more. He has 11% less health on a level 1 all-in to pure physical damage. That is a really meaningful change. He goes from taking 711 to taking 634, and until level 14, he doesn't break even on that one. Worth noting that because the late game health is going up, the value of late game health on Jayce is relatively very slightly diminished. The armor is never actually anybody because it's still 2% at the end right here. So anyway, all this to say that Jayce is definitely going to be, this is an overall nerf by far, and it is a nerf that affects pro play more than solo queue by nerfing early game, which is a great choice, and I'm glad they're doing it. Good job, Riot. Next up is Kalista. Kalista has not been seen very much. She's going to get easier to play for regular solo queue players. I'm always a fan of mana buffs. I'm always going to contend that I would like to see base mana go up and mana per level go down to have a somewhat constrained mana pool across all champions. I just find that to be, I don't think it's, you get slight wins out of having a more constrained set of mana on champions. It's not a really big deal though. 5 flat move speed, I don't believe affects how far she moves with her jumps. Actually, I could be wrong. It depends how the math is on how Kalista jump works. I forget if it's, so I know the distance traveled on jump is based on the tier of her boots. The time it takes her to finish a hop, I believe, is based on her current move speed. It's some division of distance divided by total move speed at this point in time, which is why her hops are really slow when movement speed slowed. So actually this should, if I recall correctly, if I understand correctly, should actually make her hops take less time to complete, which could be a pretty big deal. Attack speed growth, of course, is going to be some decent late game stuff, and base mana going to be early game forgiving. Her mana is already very forgiving if you're good with Rend, because Rend is a full mana refund no matter how many stacks you have, as long as you get a kill at all. Anyway, here is the total mana, up 20%. Goes up to a reasonably high 1065. And then here's her attack per second before and afterwards. She has pretty high attack speed growth already. Again, you know, baseline 1.16, 1.22. Quite high overall. Generally speaking, this means she doesn't need to buy bonus attack speed as much as other champions. In fact, Kalista has very high AD growth as well. It's the kind of thing where I wonder if there is a good Bruiser Kalista build, because Kalista has the kind of base stat scaffolding that like Zeri has, where Zeri has so much raw sort of from ability ranks damage, and she just wants to stay in fights for so long that Zeri, for the last 7 patches, has had to have her her bruiser builds nerfed, because just building health is good enough. She's got enough, you know, free damage from the kit already. Kalista's kind of in this boat as well. Why build attack speed when I get to 1.22 attacks per second at level 18 anyway? You don't really have a need to. The same reason that Locket Senna is good, because like she's not really rewarded for buying AD and attack speed because she already has so much. I wonder, like, it's worth investigating if Bruiser Kalista is a real thing. Have fun with that one, everyone. Next up, Karthus just does a bit more damage to minions. This is what, like 14% more damage, something like that. 13% more damage to monsters. That's definitely a clear speed increase. Q is the primary clear tool when clearing. Even if you start with blue buff and you get a leash, you cannot leave E on at all times when clearing. So not only do you get, you know, level 2 Q at level 3 once your first 3 camps are done, but you aren't even leaving E on at all times. So a like 12% buff or whatever to Q damage is going to be actually pretty meaningful, because your E is not doing a ton of heavy lifting, and obviously the machete is doing some, but this is actually a pretty big deal. This affects your own Karthus quite meaningfully. Next up is Lee Sin. Lee Sin getting mostly early game focused nerfs. Early game focused damage nerfs, so 2 base AD is going to slow down his clear a little bit, and nerf his dueling a little bit. 5 damage off of Q, which is of course both halves, so it's, you know, 5, 10, or even 15 damage off of the full spell. Definitely could be meaningful. So, and I gotta point out kind of as well, just like the fact that like this ability only triples in damage. In this day and age, a large portion of abilities in League of Legends more than triple in damage when you max out the ability. So the fact that Lee Sin was getting less than triple pre-patch means he was really early game skewed. There's a world where this ability can be, you know, 45 to 165. That's probably like too much of a buff, to be clear, but like there are abilities that are in that world, right? That actually, like, that's the numbers they have. They can even have, you know, disjointed scaling here, where the, you know, second half could do different damage. Either way, whatever. Not really a big deal. Point is, early game nerfs to Lee Sin. So base AD, I am rolling in his expected AD buys. Of course, he does build attack damage. He goes for a Gore Drinker and whatnot. You know, he goes for a Death Stance or GA or whatever. He keeps building AD as a champion. So here is his actual like base auto attack damage, like total auto attack damage in a real game before and after. And then here is his total Q, not total Q, but like 1/2 of the Q before and after. Obviously, you can triple this for maximal damage or double it or somewhere in between if you're going to land both halves. But overall damage is still down by this percentage no matter what you do with it. So there you go. Next up is Lillia. Now, Lillia's getting a pretty meaningful AP ratio buff here. I want to point out that my internal rubric for is their AP ratio decent is the amount of AP it takes to double the value of this ability, does that number start with a 3? Is it such a good ratio that it takes under 300 AP to double the damage, which is really, really extreme ratio? Or is it such a weak ratio that it takes over 400 ability power to double the value of this ability? So I want to point out here that this is 700 ability power to double the healing. Right? Yep. Over 700 ability power to double the healing by level 18. So glad to see an AP ratio buff. Obviously, the weird thing about a scaling thing like this is that the base value keeps scaling from 1 to 18. The AP ratio is flat somewhere. Like, hey, by the way, it only takes, 60 ability power to double, the level 1 healing. So, you can't just apply it completely directly to the ability overall, but it's worth pointing out that, when the base value is around 60 healing is 300 AP doubles. And then as soon as it passes 60 healing, or let's call it, 70, 75 healing, the AP ratio is sort of weak on this ability. And that means that you would rather have things like potentially ability haste or armor and magic resist or some other tank stat because AP isn't going to do enough for its cost, as far as this ability is concerned, right? That's all. This ability in a similar boat, right? This is, 100 AP is 35, so we're looking at, 450 AP doubles the damage of the ability. Another ability that has a very weak AP ratio compared to its base damage. And so Lillia is being pushed toward bruiser builds based on her scalings. Just by the way, that's how the math's working out. But bigger AP ratio on the passive, and then a bigger flat damage on W. So here is the passive heal. I'm accounting for a generic AP build. Indeed, kind of filtering in here. Obviously, there is some AP when doing this math because it's an AP ratio buff outright. So, here's the numbers. But yeah, definitely some more healing in combat against champions. And the W doing some more damage, but obviously falls off a cliff pretty hard because, again, the AP ratio is pretty lackluster. And you're left with, only a 4% damage buff, which is still something, right? It's relatively early game focused damage buffs on Lillia. Obviously clear speed on W. This has a sweet spot mechanic, so it's going to do more than 10 damage per cast in a jungle clear. It's AoE. You can get it to hit everything in the camp, or at least close enough to it. You can get all 3 holes, I'm pretty sure, reliably. And things that matter, like the big raptor, that's not a problem as well. So definitely clear speed buff, definitely an early dueling buff, definitely more regen. Solid buff to Lillia. Okay, next up is going to be Neeko. They are adding buffs to on-hit Neeko. You'll notice that rank 1 of the ability is not any better. AP ratio unchanged, base damage unchanged, move speed buff unchanged as well. And the common build for Neeko is Qmax, Emax. So, buffs at level 14 onwards are not going to be a big deal. It's not going to affect pro play. It's not going to affect player perception overall. But if you want to play on-hit Neeko, wow, do we have the buff for you. 10% increased move speed for 3 seconds and a whopping 40 bonus damage per splice or whatever. This is every 3rd auto attack, so call it, 13 base AD if you really want by the end of it all. But here is the amount of damage that Neeko W deals per auto attack, assuming you're maxing W first. You're maxing it last, again, the numbers don't change until level 14 right here. And again, it's basically trivial. I don't know, my nose keeps itching, but it's very annoying. I would like it to stop. But as far as, actual auto attack damage is concerned, actually not too bad. This is a pretty respectable. Now, by the way, I'm including this with no bonus AP on the kit. I'm making the assumption that an attack speed Neeko build might be something like Rage Blade and Ruin King. And of course, I could include the AD from things like Rage Blade and Ruin King. I didn't. That is, basically inflating the value of this buff because a real on-hit Neeko build will in fact have more damage coming in per auto attack than this. But still, the base underlying DPS of the kit, not too bad. 147 damage per auto is not a horrible scaffolding to start building attack damage and attack speed on. And then W is distance traveled. This is 3 seconds of the buff times the move speed times her base move speed with boots 1, just as just a baseline to compare across. And so, hey, the fact that her W now actually clears about 440 move speed, and it'll be over 440 with boots 2, is actually pretty good amount of distance, right? This ability, it's, okay, it was only 10% more move speed. What does that mean? Well, it means she clears 100 more distance. Which is pretty good. Next up is Pantheon getting a big set of changes. So what's going on? Well, he's got less health regen overall. The spear is going to be narrower but longer, so his ability to kind of poke out. They're trying to thread the line here, thread the needle, tread the line, whatever, walk the line. Anyway, between no, you don't poke mages out without having to actually throw the javelin and let him get a chance to dodge it. While also saying, look, he can always reliably poke other melees. And so making the length 600 units means he can like really outrange other melees. He's supposed to be better at that. He's supposed to have some level of ranged combat as a melee champion. He can now walk away from ganks more easily because he's no longer slowed and walking backwards. And then his R is more reliable. He crashes down a quarter second sooner. So pretty big buffs here, right? I mean, the width change shouldn't mean too much. Obviously, it can be a little bit more dodgeable if you're really good. Wave clear should still be possible here. Maybe it's going to be a little bit weaker because you can't always get every target, but this is obviously pretty meaningful. This is obviously pretty meaningful. And then it's just compensatory nerfs and health regen. So the only one that's really mathable is the health regen per minute. Here's the numbers, pretty meaningfully down. Okay. Next up is Rengar, and Rengar definitely destroys structures way too quickly, so the bonus damage is reduced substantially against structures. Sorry, you're not going to blow those up nearly as quickly. And hey, by the way, Battle Roar has a per champion level scaling as bonus damage against monsters. You max W last, it's a 1.1 for him, and now it's going to do a lot more damage to monsters, so his clear speed's going to get better. Here is the Rengar W monster damage, up pretty substantially. This, of course, is AoE. It affects every camp. I believe this affects the Savagery W as well with the cooldown reset. So pretty meaningful clear speed buff, considering it's a tap that does 135 damage level 1. Definitely meaningful clear speed buff. Ryze, I did not do the math on. Ultimately, the base damage is unchanged. The bonus mana ratio is down from 3% to 2%. So keep in mind, we can do the math in our heads here, that 1,000 bonus mana, which is like just tier partially stacked plus a Everfrost, that's going to be 10 less damage, right? 1,000 bonus mana, 1% of that is that much. So how do you get 10 damage back? Well, 200 ability power, right? And in the real world, right, it's more like 800 mana or something off of the mana item, off of the Seraphs, and another 600, so it's really more like 1,500 bonus mana, and so it's actually 30 damage off of an overload, which, like, hey, by the way, 30 damage off of ability with 150 base damage, really meaningful. So 30 off the base damage is going to require you to have 30 divided by 5%, 600. That's not right, is it? Maybe it's right. I don't know. Either way, 30 divided by 5% is pretty meaningful. Actually, it might be 600. Actually, it might be 600. So 600 to AP, to balance this out. Obviously, the more AP you get, the more bonus mana you get. The math gets really funky, that's why I'm not doing the math. But basically, hey, look, really, no, you should really try building ability power in this champion. Good to see they keep trying. They're still trying with these changes. I'm just sort of overall unsure why he has bonus mana scaling in 2 places. I guess like AP becomes bonus mana, and then bonus mana is a ratio on his abilities, and I get that. And they want AP to like feel good alongside, like AP to be worth buying alongside things like Frozen Heart. But I don't know, just like the math gets clunky, and it makes it very hard to know what you're supposed to build, other than like buy mana and AP, of course. And I guess that's probably the only way you can make that work, right? Is I don't know, it doesn't really matter. I just feel like it could probably be done cleaner in another way by like, having your bonus mana give you % AP instead, just having AP ratios be the way that damage is dealt. That feels like almost a better system. It doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. Either way, it's like, hey, here's Ryze. Build mana into AP. Okay. And then, they're just going to change numbers until tank builds aren't optimal. And fair enough, right? So they're trying again. Let's hope it works this time. Next up is Wukong, getting some pretty big changes. So we've got Crushing Blow on a 1 second lower cooldown. We've got Warrior Trickster on a cooldown that's only going to be better at level 14 and onwards, but I can go over terrain, which is pretty cute. And then Nimbus Strike is going to have a bigger AP ratio for the off-meta builds, but also a substantial increase in bonus damage to monsters. So what does that mean overall? Well, here's Wukong's Q and W cooldown. Obviously, 1 second flat is going to be good at all points in the game, but really meaningful here. W cooldown, again, not going to matter to level 14. And again, not that big of a deal, but here you go. There's the numbers. The more interesting one is the Wukong AP E damage. So this is assuming you're playing AP Wukong, maxing E second. Probably should have been maxing first, but whatever. With a sort of generic, here's like some expected AP on the champion, and here's how much more damage his ability deals. Not bad from an AP ratio buff on an AP build. Okay. The more interesting part is it does 20% more damage to monsters. Now, we're assuming that Jungle Wukong is probably going to be AD Wukong. I don't know, maybe Jungle Wukong is AP Wukong, and it's actually supposed to be some mix of these two numbers together, and it's like 35% more damage. I don't know. That doesn't sound like what's going to happen, but whatever. Yeah, 20% more damage is pretty good, right? 1.5 becomes 1.8. That's 20% more damage. 0.3 more. And it's pretty substantial clear speed increase, right? This is an ability, by the way, that it gets its cooldown refunded by landing auto attacks. So yeah, it's up pretty constantly, and it's going to feel pretty good. So definitely meaningful clear speed increase. Next up, we have Yasuo changes. So Yasuo is not doing well. The nerfs in 12.6 to all his lifesteal stuff, of course, matters. Turns out he is a melee fighter with a very, very long window of downtime on his safety tools. He has to be in melee range to last hit. He doesn't have a lot of ways to sustain without getting into items. And of course, you know, Ravenous got nerfed. Legend Bloodline got nerfed, and Shield Bow got nerfed. So hey, Yasuo, here's some health. You're not going to sustain anymore. You know, you're not going to get the sustain back, but here's some more health. Here's a lower early game R cooldown. My understanding of Yasuo's win rate curve is he tends to be early game skewed. And so 30 more health, lower early cooldown and last breath. It's going to push his early game power. His late game is still going to be a little bit rough in a lot of cases. Either way, here's his health difference. Here's his cooldown difference. Nothing too huge going on here. Again, just it's a lot of champions with like 2 small sets of changes, and they're moving on from there. Yone, however, is a champion who scales really hard. Yone tends to lose a lot of his lanes, but his late game is very, very good. Going down to a 1-minute cooldown on R is pretty big, but again, it is an ulti cooldown change. It's not that big of a deal, and it only even matters from level 11 onwards. Everything else before then, there was nothing new about the champion, and he still took all those changes, all those nerfs, so what does this really mean? Anyway, here's where he's at, right? Small buff, doesn't mean a whole ton. Off we go. Next up, a huge set of changes to Zeri. They are really, really trying to nerf her out of her bruiser builds. So what's going on? Well, first up, we're going to go we're going to jump around a bit. So base AD and AD growth is down. 53 to 87 becomes 50 to 75.5. And with the AD going down, the Q damage is getting changed. The base damage is going down by a bunch, but the eventual total AD ratio is going up. So what does that mean? Well, let's start out with her base AD. And of course, her base AD is actually going to be in the red. We can change that real quick. It's in fact lower. No one's surprised here. Her base AD is down, but this doesn't mean anything intrinsically because it only ever feeds into other things. So here is the actual Q damage, and it is down pretty substantially, right? Now, I want to point out that this math is done assuming you're actually building real attack damage. Using my standard analysis for here's about how much AD you buy as an AD champion. Now, it's worth noting that her bruiser atomization does tend to have decent raw AD on it. Triforce only has 33. It's less than a Kraken Slayer. But Titanic Hydra has a decent amount. Cleaver has a decent amount. It's not going to be that far from other options. And in fact, some of the Zeri builds are going to go for things like Hurricane, which don't have AD on them at all. And so things like this actually nerf Hurricane pretty substantially. But again, her damage is in fact down, even if you are building a lot of raw AD. Or at least moderate raw AD, but it does kind of catch up. Basically to say, look, if you stop building raw AD, your damage will fall off, but the reason it's kind of catching up is because in my metric here, I'm still assuming she's buying more and more AD and catching up. That, you know, this nerf of 4% is actually assuming you've got, let me see actually, 81 bonus attack damage at this point in time, which is like Kraken Slayer, Doran's Ring, like Kraken Slayer, Doran's Blade, and stuff. If this is Trinity Force and nothing, it's much, much worse than this. So kind of worth pointing out how that works out. Next up is her base armor is down, but her health growth is up a little bit. Well, what that means is that indeed her health is overall going up. But with her armor going down, that means the value of buying more health goes down somewhat. So you can see that her getting 85 bonus health is really... it is, you know, 100 damage taken increase because she still has some armor, but right, percentage-wise, 4% more health is only 3% more durability against physical damage. Now, of course, she is tankier against magic damage at all points in time, and indeed, like, she is tankier, right? Like, she is tankier as a champion. This is not really debatable. She is tankier. That's just a fact. But the comparative value of buying health is going down because she has more overall, and she has less armor to multiply it against, and so that will do a little bit there. Not a ton, but a little bit. It's a love tap. Next up, so right now it's actually very competitive. Maxing W or E second, they are identical in win rate, and you could go either way. However, that is getting broken apart with this patch. So W just simply deals 30 less base damage, but has a higher total AD ratio, meaning at 150 total AD, you catch the damage back up. 150 times 0.2 is 30. There's the math. And it's not that hard to get 150 AD, but it takes a little bit, right? You have to still get through your build. However, Spark Surge is now getting a cooldown incentive again on ranking it up. So we're once again forced into Emax second. you'll notice that these are really early game focused nerfs, and even in Lightning Crash here, early game focused nerfs with a buff at level 16. So Zeri right now is an early game focused champion. Her bruiser builds have a really good early game win rate, and so all these nerfs have been heavier in the early game. W damage, heavier in the early game, eventually gets enough bonus AD, does more damage. E cooldown, heavier in the early game, eventually gets level 13. You know, a lot better in the late game. R cooldown, higher in the early game. I got my numbers backwards, or my colors backwards, and nicer in the late game. So basically every single place here, she is weaker in the early game, 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 a bit stronger in the end game. Weaker in the early game, catches up by the end game. Weaker in the early game, stronger by the end game. Weaker in the early game, stronger by the end game. Weaker in the early game, stronger by the end game. So constantly reshaping these abilities, reshaping the cooldowns, pushing the numbers to make her less an early game champion. Pro tends to be early game skewed. This will do a lot. There's a really good chance this actually kicks her out of pro play entirely. Solo queue win rate, it will go down. I'm pretty confident in that. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be hard to guess the numbers. There's so many changes, hard to say. Probably 2%, maybe 3%. We'll see if it's more than that. Because like this is a buff. And so we'll see. Next up, Abyssal Mask can now shred a full 25 MR and not just 20. This is nice. I would say that builds of tank item into Warmogs, into Demonic, into Abyssal, and yes, Abyssal is a 4th item. That's pretty rough. But that kind of build is one of the most underrepresented builds in League of Legends right now. Maybe Abyssal instead of Demonic at a certain point. And maybe even doing Abyssal and Demonic instead of Warmogs is a possibility. But these kind of builds are actually very, very, very good. They're incredibly underrepresented. They are really strong. I recommend trying them out. Abyssal Mask is a all-star of an item in these kinds of builds. Really, really, really try them. I think it's a cool change, and I think it's actually pretty strong. Gale Force gets 20 seconds on its cooldown. It is getting overbought, especially in Pro, so down it goes. Moonstone Renewer, apparently from solo queue data, is overperforming, so the overall heal and shield power it gives is going down. Fair enough. Umbral Glaive is getting a buff. 100 gold cheaper and 10 seconds off the blackout cooldown. Here is that data. So it is an efficient item in terms of attack damage, ability, haste, and lethality to the tune of about 5%. It's now efficient to the tune of 10%, which makes it a very worthwhile item to buy. Honestly, yeah, really, really worth buying. 2,300 gold makes it very appealing as a support item. I believe this is the generic price point of support items overall. So 2,300 gold, cool stuff. Blackout, obviously, shorter cooldown as well. Definitely several very big buffs. Definitely worth looking at some AD Assassin to play for vision control. Cool beans there. Next up is a nerf to Winter's Approach, a double nerf. It is getting 100 gold more expensive and 50 less health on it. So this is another nerf onto Ryze to say, hey, really, really consider not buying Winter's Approach anymore. Really try something else instead, maybe. This makes it 100 gold more expensive than Seraph's now. Health is obviously still higher than Seraph's, I believe, itself, but, you know, worth looking at the fact that, okay, this item went from 113% gold efficient. I'm assuming so this math, by the way, right? This is the ability haste. Okay, great. This is the health, assuming a very, very low, very moderate 500 base mana and an 860 mana off the item. Now, obviously, if it's 600 mana on the item and it's 760 base mana, that's the same numbers here, right? And realistically, most tanks reach 1,000 base mana by the end of the game. Obviously, this item is not coming online at level 18, so I picked something really safe. But yeah, hey, you were paying for the mana a fair bit. Any other mana you had, like a Frozen Heart, would obviously filter in as well. So, you know, what is it? 500 mana on a Frozen Heart would be 40 more health, which is a solid like 100-something gold as well. You could add in, you know, now it's 3,000 gold of stats and whatnot. Yeah, sure, you're paying a lot for the mana. Maybe this is slightly overpriced. You wouldn't really pay 1,200 gold for this much mana, but it turns into a bigger item down the line. So, you know, Fimbulwinter is good. But anyway, got nerfed by 50 health, got nerfed by 100 cost. And here we are at 104% gold efficient before being Fimbulwinter. And yeah, I mean, this is pretty meaningful, right? Now, it is still worth pointing out, again, this was a 510 health item. And realistically, if you're like, actually, it's more like, you know, 650 health or something. Maybe it's actually 700 health. This is, you know, 525. You know, or 700 base mana, I think is, you know, pretty reasonable for a mid game. Hey, yeah, it was a 575 base health item. Or, you know, 575 bonus health item, which gave another 40 if you bought a Frozen Heart, something like that. Like, yeah, it turns out it's a lot, right? If you had biscuits, you added a little bit more there as well. It all added up. So, yeah, it was a really, really, really high health item. Unsurprisingly, it was bought a lot. Doesn't surprise anyone here, but Yep, there's a small nerf. So that is it for the patch rundown. One more thing. Time Warp Tonic gives less move speed and less immediate health. I would have liked a version that was just the immediate health and not the move speed. I think this is very vestigial. I don't think you pick Time Warp Tonic because of the move speed. I mean, it's whatever, but I would have liked this to stay and this to go down. Not a huge deal. Some ARM changes, so let's do a quick look at the patch 12.7 TLDR. Mostly changes for pro play. Gangplank, more burn damage later and more mana to spend on his W because his W is cheaper. Pretty small changes here, but not bad. Gwen gets 20% off of her functional E cooldown. And some pretty meaningful cooldown changes off of the needlework as well, buffed at level 6 through 15. So pretty nice stuff there. Jayce is much weaker in the early game from base health. Base health is down by 40, armor's down by 5. Armor catches up, health eventually eclipses. But yeah, substantially weaker early game, much more all-inable, a little bit more durable in the late game. Kalista gets some more mana, which is more forgiving. Overall runs faster, should take less time to complete a hop, and more late game attack speed. There's a chance Bruiser Kalista is the thing. I'm not sure yet, though. Karthus gets a pretty substantial clear speed increase. Cool beans there. Leeson loses 2 AD and 5 damage off of each part of Q, which is actually going to be 5 to 15 damage off of Q. Pretty meaningful early game nerf. Definitely going to mean something. Lillia gets a moderate AP ratio buff. To be fair, this AP ratio is very, very poor, so could use it. Get some flat damage out of the W. Pretty nice early game damage buff. This definitely helps clear speed because monsters don't dodge W. So solid buffs to Lillia. Neeko, if you're going to build attack speed W max Neeko, gets about 13 more damage per auto attack and about 100 more distance cleared on rank 5 W in terms of how far you can travel during the move speed buff. You get about 100 units farther ahead, which is pretty meaningful, or farther away. Pantheon loses a little bit of health regen. It doesn't really mean a ton, but gets some nice interesting changes in the fact that you can run backwards at full speed with E, and you land sooner with R, both of which should be pretty meaningful. Looking forward to those. Rengar doesn't blow up structures nearly as hard, as the bonus damage has been cut by nearly half, but gets a flat 20 bonus damage on W against monsters that I believe affects both Ws, the Frosty version and the non-Frosty version, which is a pretty meaningful amount of damage. So definitely clear speed buff to him. Good job, Jungle Rengar. Next up is Ryze, who loses 1% bonus mana ratio, which is going to do something to the tune of 15 damage off of Overload, because losing 1% of about 1,500 bonus mana is 15 damage off of Overload. To get that back, I don't know what, yeah, to get 15, again, to get 15 damage back on Overload, it's going to take about 300 AP to make that back on this AP ratio buff, because 15 divided by 5% should be, if I'm not trolling, 300 AP, which is a solid 3 to 4 items on the champion. So again, pushing towards AP builds away from tank builds. Wukong gets 1 second off of his Q cooldown, a functionally non-change to the W cooldown because it's only level 14 onwards, but, cool when it happens. But you can jump over walls, which is pretty big quality of life. And it's actually just a strict buff. It's not even quality of life. It is a buff, objectively. And then at this point, a AP ratio buff to Nimbus Strike, but the more interesting one is a chance at Jungle Wukong, as his E now does 20% more damage to monsters than before. Yasuo is somewhat of an early game skewed champion, gets 30 bonus health and a buff on ultimates level 6 through 15. See how much that matters, but some small buffs. I think he's doing a little bit poorly, but not horribly, so small buffs. Yone is a late game version of that champion. Scales really, really hard and actually is getting late game buffs to his ultimate, so even more kind of overbearing in late game if he gets there. Now, Zeri gets a bunch of really, really big changes. Functionally, TLDR. TLDR, she is more durable for pretty much the entire game, a little bit less durable really, really early on, a little bit less appetite for bonus HP from things like Titanic Hydra and Black Cleaver, but it's pretty minor over there. But the big thing is her sort of overall base damage is going down pretty meaningfully. This basically breaks even at level 18 on a full build. Otherwise, the more AD you're forsaking, because more of the power budget is in buying more total AD to make the total AD ratio, do work, the more AD you're forsaking to go Bruiser, the less damage you're dealing. Burst Fire no longer affects, no longer can apply Titanic Hydra on multiple targets. It doesn't get multiple R stacks and whatnot. But now crits will give an extra stack, which is a little bit cute. All right. Either way, though, Ultra Shock Laser is down 30 base damage and gets it back at 150 total AD. which will, again, require several items. Spark Surge, early game nerf here by 5 seconds. Finally at level 13, it's finally a buff, but even at level 12, it's a nerf. And Lightning Crash is nerfed until level 16. So in all these cases, early game nerf, better to equal in the late game. And yeah, pushing her out of early game, which is a pro focus nerf, and pushing her towards building more AD and building more AD so you don't forsake quite as much. And again, here's a crit lever as well. Abyssal Mask is one of the most underbought items in League of Legends. It is very, very, very good. People should buy it much more often. This item is outstanding. I feel like this should be an automatic pick on Sion if you have a second AP champion somewhere on your team. Gale Force, small nerf, 20 seconds on cooldown. Moonstone Renewer, a little bit less heal and shield power. Probably from Solik you did it, fair enough. Umbral Glaive, pretty meaningful buff. It's 100 gold cheaper and gets a lower cooldown on Blackout. This is definitely going to be pretty meaningful. Definitely worth looking at. This item is 110% gold efficient before Blackout. And this is using a actual reasonable metric for what lethality should cost. So, pretty strong stuff here. Like, definitely worth looking at. When its approach is nerfed by 100 gold and 50 health, which is another 133 gold. So this item got nerfed by 233 gold, which is really meaningful, right? So yeah, worth looking at, worth really considering if you want to keep going for Winter's Approach here. Is overall doing pretty strong. Keep in mind that if you buy it later on, you know, 3rd or even 4th, the item gets more heavy lifting done from your base mana. So you, or, you know, maybe a Frozen Heart coming in as well. So it still can sit as a pretty good item, you know, 4th or something. But less of an obvious slam dunk as item 2 or item 3. Time Warp Tonic, a bit less instant health, a bit less move speed. Pretty small change there, but that's what happened. All right, that's the patch rundown. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye-bye.